We've all heard the stories about the poor the poor woman in the third world who gets a loan for $50 and buys a sewing machine and lifts her family out of poverty. And who wouldn't love that story? We all love it. And so about 20 years ago, a lot of money started flooding into this sector. And maybe you wonder where it all goes. So Hugh Sinclair is here today to tell us where it goes. Hugh stayed in some of the worst hotels on the planet, eaten some of the worst food on the planet, including the porcupine smoothie. Be sure and ask him about that one. So he spent about 10 years in places like Mozambique and Mexico and Lagos, Nigeria, right next to the building where all those Nigerian princes live, and gotten in a fair bit of trouble by telling the truth about where the money actually goes and what happens to it. For instance, ask him about Kiva. He has some good stories about that. So without further ado, I always love saying that, please welcome Hugh Sinclair.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Great honor to be in the Google headquarters. Heard a lot about it. Lightning introduction. I mean, first of all, how familiar are people with microfinance? You all vaguely know what it is. Has anyone done any investments in microfinance, in Kiva, those sorts of things, funds? Yeah, okay. So this is probably going to be kind of sobering. I'm an economist originally and former investment banker. I have an MBA from the SA Business School in Barcelona. And I was, I believe, the last employee at Enron. I joined 2 weeks before it collapsed. So it's either totally my fault or nothing to do with me. I'll leave it up to you to decide. So I then sort of became a bit disillusioned with mainstream finance. You know, it wasn't going that well. This was 10 years ago. Let's try something new. I'd only ever really worked as an economist and in banking, so I figured, let's do microfinances. It's finance related, it's technical, all this sort of stuff, but hopefully I can have an impact. So I sort of went into the sector with this naive idea of, let's try and help the poor. So yeah, during this decade, I think I spent 8 of the 10 years living in developing countries. So I'm not one of these people who live in DC and fly to, some far-flung nation, take a couple of photos, and then say that I'm working in development. I actually live in these countries, to this day. And I guess the only other thing I need to do as an introduction is to say, I'm a heretic now, thanks to writing this book. I'm a whistleblower, and I'm enjoying all the benefits of being fired by an entire industry simultaneously, which is a quite unusual feeling. I'm going to just do a lightning summary of microfinance. We all know what it is. This idea of the woman with the goat or the sewing machine, she gets the $100 loan, she builds up some business, and with the income from that business, she gets out of poverty, she repays the loan, recycles the loan to the next person, everyone's a winner. We're all familiar with this story, yeah? Now, the reality is that it is actually very, very different, yeah? First of all, it should come as no surprise that the vast majority of people are not a budding Bill Gates entrepreneur, yeah? It's not so easy to actually make very high returns in developing countries when maybe you have very limited education, you're operating in fiercely competitive markets. It's actually really, really difficult. And it should come as no surprise that, is there much evidence of people building up these huge enterprises on the back of a $200 loan? Absolutely none whatsoever. How much of the capital isn't actually invested in a business at all? It's very difficult to find out how much money is used simply for paying off, getting a loan from one bank to pay off the next bank, to pay off the next bank, to pay off the next bank. This sort of recycling of credit, it's very difficult to get estimates of that. It's very difficult to find out how much microfinance is actually just spent on consumption. There are estimates. There was an estimate in the Harvard Business Review a few years ago suggesting it might be as high as 90% is not actually going into a micro-enterprise at all. I think that's a bit on the high side, but my gut feel is that there's certainly at least 3/4 of all microfinance is going nowhere near a micro-enterprise. So of course, it's not having an impact. It's not going to an enterprise in the first place. Then there's been all the recent cases, particularly in Andhra Pradesh, in India, of really bad abuses of clients. There's been 54 suicides so far, which have been blamed by the Indian government. Published a report suggesting that this was at the hands of aggressive money lenders disguised as microfinance institutions, basically. There's been cases of women forced into prostitution, and there's been cases of children being kidnapped as collateral for loans. So we're talking, in the worst cases, some pretty sordid activities. But there's also, we shouldn't forget child labor. Who do you think is actually working in these small micro enterprises when they suddenly have to, increase their production by 500% in order just to cover the interest costs. Yeah? When you suddenly go from selling 20 tomatoes to 200 tomatoes, it's labor intensive. Where do you get the labor from? Your own children. So there is also now growing evidence. There's been a few academic papers looking into this that are suggesting that actually microfinance and promoting this informal economy might actually be resulting in children being taken out of schools to work in what we call micro sweatshops. Yeah? And if you think about it, it would make complete sense that happens. If you walk around one of these poor markets in some remote corner of Africa or in Latin America, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on a school day, what do you see? Kids running around stacking shelves. So it's not really surprising that this happens. There's also some really fundamental problems with the model. If you provide, if you work on the supply side of a market, if you increase the number of people selling tomatoes, sure, some of those tomato vendors might actually do very well, yeah? But the total number of tomatoes being sold, the total demand is not changing. Microfinance is on the supply side. So what about all those people who are being displaced, people who used to sell tomatoes and have now been driven out of the business, yeah? Because there's only so many tomatoes for sale. So that whole aspect, they call it job displacement or crowding out, is completely ignored by the microfinance community. They only focus on the people who get the loans. They don't focus on, there's no discussion of the people who got displaced. It's like if you're analyzing a national lottery and you only interview the winners. You need to talk to the million people who bought a ticket and didn't win. This is just a little thing that we just quietly forget. But then above all the academic evidence, there's been 2 really big studies. David Rudman at the Center for Global Development in DC recently summarized it very succinctly. He said that the overall impact of microfinance on poverty reduction is 0. And then Maren Duvendak, the academic funded by the UK government in Britain, she analysed 2,836 academic papers over the last 30 years and concluded that microfinance had no impact on poverty reduction whatsoever. And actually, it may have been a huge waste of time and a missed opportunity had we actually used the money for something else. So the literature is really coming down hard against the microfinance sector, which is unfortunate. So I tried to fix this from the inside, working in these institutions, sort of pointing these things out. Didn't work. So I started leaking stories to the media, hoping to attract some attention. I actually got a story onto the front page of the New York Times. Momentarily interesting for a few people, oh, that's cool. But it's called the rogue operator argument. Oh no, there's another bad one. Oh, there's a bad one. But the system, microfinance overall is good. But yeah, every now and then there's few exceptions. That's the way that it's presented to the outside world. So what I decided to do was actually just write a book and explain that these are not isolated cases. This is an actual systemic flaw in the entire microfinance sector. So that's why I've now been fired by everyone in the world. What's unusual about the book? I mean, really, there's a subtle shift of focus that I've tried to do. There's been other books written about microfinance, yeah? But this is the first one which is written by an insider who's worked often to quite high levels within the sector. And it's the first one to really specifically name individual people and individual companies very clearly, total transparency, every single document, audio recordings, video footage, emails, every single supporting document for the entire book is online. For people, anyone can go onto the website and check it out and verify these things for themselves. Because sometimes you're reading the book, you're like, no, I don't believe that it actually got that bad, or that someone of that level of seniority was doing these sorts of actions. And all I just say to the reader is, go to the website. You want to listen to the entire phone call? You can download the entire call. The names, nothing is hidden. Yeah. Oh, yeah, the website's microfinancetransparency.com. So I detail who's involved, how they did it, why they did it, and how they tried to cover it up. Yeah. And given that I was actually one of the people who did these things and worked to some extent on the cover-ups, I have fairly good information on this, yeah? I don't just look at the individual MFIs, the individual institutions, but I try to explain, where is the money coming from? Who are the investors? Who's providing the money for all this? How much information did they know when they made these certain investments, yeah? I look at the role of the rating agencies, I look at the role of the regulators, and then importantly, the PR companies. How do they take this data and how do they spin it to the world so that we all sort of think, oh, this is wonderful, and we open our wallets and we invest more money. The main problem, my view of the main problem in the microfinance sector is In economics, it's referred to as the principal agent problem. You've got money, and you can't invest it directly yourself into an individual, micro entrepreneur. So you have to go through an institution. So it might be, examples in the US are Green Foundation USA, Calvert Foundation, Kiva, Deutsche Bank microcredit funds, Citibank, Standard Chartered. All these people have microfinance funds, or they facilitate you getting your money from your pocket to the poor people. My basic premise is, how can we ensure that those intermediaries are acting in our best interests and the best interests of the poor? In any other area of business, any other area of finance, the principal agent problem is considered to be a huge obstacle. In microfinance, apparently, it doesn't exist. It is a complete myth. There's absolutely no reason to believe that the person who you trust your money with when you're trying to do a microfinance investment is acting in their best interests. That is the only thing you can be truly sure of. Yeah? Those do not necessarily match up with the interests of the poor or your own interests. And then what I try to do is I try to provide a roadmap for people. So instead of just saying, well, these are good, these are bad, what I try to do is to say to people, explain to the reader, okay, this is how you can go and find out if the vehicle that you're using, the intermediary that you're using, is good or bad. This is how you would see a good institution, a good microfinance bank from a bad one. These are the sorts of questions you need to ask. Yeah? These are the kind of responses that you've got to be listening out for. And if you get told things, for example, we don't know what the interest rate is, we can't actually tell you what the interest rate is because of some technical reason. Yeah? These are like big alarm bells. Do not, be careful. Yeah? So what I try to do is help people to be empowered to make the right decisions. Because at the end of the day, there are two groups of people who are being exploited in microfinance. Yeah? There's the poor, and there are you guys. You guys who believe that you're doing something useful, and you trust that you have the best intentions to try and do something to help the poor. So in actual fact, you're being duped just as much as the woman who signs a contract and suddenly finds out she's paying 195% interest a year. Yeah? There's two angles to it. Right, I'm not gonna summarize the book in any more detail. What I'm going to talk about is, how did we get into this mess? How did we arrive in a situation where we're making loans to poor people at 195% interest, yeah, and we're believing that we're helping people get out of poverty? I mean, if you think about it, it's completely ridiculous, really. And we sort of think, well, if this company that is charging 195% interest a year does an IPO and individual people make multi-million dollar packages, Axion made on a $1 million investment in the IPO of Compartamos, made $270 million. It's a very, very decent return. You look at what interest rates the poor are paying, 195% is the maximum rates in that particular bank, and no one's putting two and two together and saying, maybe it's the poor people paying so much interest, which made these people make so much money. Yeah? So how did we get here? It's actually completely ridiculous. It's so against what Muhammad Yunus originally said, let's use affordable credit to help people get out of poverty. Yeah? It's not happening, but how did it get this bad? So I think there are a number of reasons to explain this. I think first of all, it's the idea. We love the idea. It sounds so beautiful, that it's self-help, it's empowerment, it's harnessing the entrepreneurial flair, it's the triple bottom line, bottom of the pyramid, social business. It touches all the right buttons that we want to hear. Yeah? And it's just a nice story. It's compatible with our sort of view of the world. Competition is a good thing. It's gonna bring about wonderful outcomes. We can solve all the world's problems with this kind of free market neoliberal economic strategy. Yeah, not that it's doing particularly well right now, but yeah. But I think above all, there was a sort of growing discontent with traditional aid. Which is best summarized. It's not don't give the man the fish, teach the man to fish. It was this kind of normal aid in the last century. People were sort of getting a bit tired of it. It didn't seem to really be working, and it wasn't so nice. You just giving away money. So they were disillusioned. There was a certain disillusionment with traditional aid. And then microfinance came along, and it was new, and it was cool, and it was kind of innovative, and it harnessed all these things. And people were ready for something new. So they just jumped onto the bandwagon. Yeah? The problem is that there's no transparency. There's no regulation whatsoever. When you make a loan in India, there is actually no one sitting there protecting the rights of the Indian client. There are now, because they all started committing suicide and the Indian regulator stepped in. But when you make a loan in these countries, there's no one looking over the shoulder of the poor person protecting them. Yeah? It's totally and utterly unregulated. Women are signing contracts with their fingerprints because they can't read and write. And in the contract, they are giving away all their rights. Yeah? You can come in and you can take the last piece of tin off their roof, and they agree to it. Yeah? There is no one protecting their interests. In the US, who is regulating the institutions that are taking the money from the general public? No one. There's absolutely no one. If you think that because Deutsche Bank is SEC regulated, that means Deutsche Bank microcredit fund, someone's actually looking over the shoulder and actually investigating what they're investing in India, in Mexico, in Bolivia, in Nigeria, just dream on. There's no regulation. So, I mean, it's not really a huge surprise that we ended up in this situation. We've then got this slightly ridiculous thing going on in the UK right now. You know, with the LIBOR scandal, these people tweaking the interest rates by 0.1%, and everyone's up in arms about this. Yeah, we've got the whole European Union is now saying, oh, Spain's going to have to pay 7% interest a year, and this is enough to actually bankrupt the entire EU potentially, and yet we expect the poor to pay interest rates of 80, 100, 150, 195%. I mean, it's just, if you think about it, it's completely ridiculous. But the reason is that there's massive profit to be made from microfinance. And this is the thing which people are sort of slightly forgetting. We think that making profit is going to attract the new investors and that this is going to result in a more competitive market and all this sort of stuff. We buy this sort of ideology. But let's not put the horse before the cart. The bottom line is, people are being attracted to microfinance because in a totally unregulated environment, they can make extremely high returns. Yeah? This is the bottom line. And I think the other thing is that the other reason why we're in this mess is just this kind of soundbite culture that has sort of emerged. You know, we've got there's massive marketing campaigns promoting microfinance. We've got people like, I don't know if you're aware of Burson Marsteller, the PR company. Rachel Maddow in her show summarized it. She said, when evil needs PR, evil has Burson Marsteller on speed dial. These are the guys who did Union Carbide, General Pinochet, that favorite, Big Tobacco, who else did? All the bad dudes, the people who did the Facebook smear campaign against you guys, I believe, that was Burson Marsteller. These are the people who are now defending the microfinance sector. They're working with Friends of Grameen. There's this huge kind of spin. Oh, get images onto people's screens. Tell them, we need another 500 pictures of women with sewing machines. This will make it all blow over. And people have limited attention spans. You know, they see these pieces of bad news and they go, oh, well, it was on The Simpsons. It wasn't, the guy got a Nobel Prize. Oprah Winfrey interviewed them, so it's probably okay. I'll keep on giving them money. And there's just this kind of sense of just, no one's actually looking into the details. Yeah? No one's actually stopping and just saying, hang on, let me just take stock of this. Does this make sense? What is the evidence? And there's no one actually answering the one key problem, which is, it's not working. I mean, you'd think that would attract some attention. No, those sorts of conversations are prohibited. We're not allowed to talk about the fact that it doesn't actually work. Yeah? So I think that sort of explains maybe how we arrived in this worrying situation. The sector is now estimated as about $70 billion. It's 200 million clients now, growing at, $1 million a week or $1 million a month or something, yeah? And the microfinance community or particularly the investment community, has got very clear goals. We want to get to 1 billion. There's 1 billion people out there. They all need a credit card. They're all unregulated. And hey, we can make some decent profit out of them because we don't have these annoying regulators that we have in Europe and the United States who are going to actually start exercising people's rights. So we can just charge them whatever we want. And there's 1 billion new people to profit from. So, whistleblowing, yeah? What happens when you blow the whistle on an entire industry, okay? First of all, I can tell you, it's deeply stressful, yeah? This has been, I think, one of the toughest 6 months of my life. The last month has been total hell. Thank God I'm actually leaving in a few days, going home. I can't wait to put this all behind me. Getting fired by the entire sector. The sector, it's slightly unusual because generally what they do, when whistleblowers, there's been a couple of people who have dared to criticize it. Usually they come out guns blazing, yeah? There's been, case of academics having their funding cut, we've had two threats. The second threat was on our home phone number, and we ended up moving house shortly afterwards. You get blacklisted from conferences. No one will reply to your emails. And it's weird because on the one hand, some friends, people that you believed were friends actually turn around and stab you in the back, which is a bit disappointing. But the thing which has actually been really nice is that I've had some really great support from random people that I would never have thought of calling me up and sort of saying, okay, what can we do to clean this up? People that maybe I sort of never thought would actually, dare to come out and sort of try to clean up. They have. I mean, it's been very surprising. Yeah, the support has come from unusual places, and the betrayals have come from unusual places. Sometimes quite disappointing, to be honest. But what's unusual about this one? I think partly because of the transparency, partly because of the website. Because all the evidence is out there, this whistleblowing exercise has been slightly different to former critics, yeah? In that the entire sector has just gone silent. No one has done anything. I was in DC, which is home to some of the people most implicated in the book. World Relief, Grameen Foundation USA, actually who Google support, just mention it, and Calvert Foundation. I was expecting to have eggs thrown at me. In actual fact, didn't, which was rather nice. And I think basically now the sector is in just complete lockdown mode. No one's issuing a press release. No one's answering phone calls. No one's replying to emails. It's just silence. We don't want to give any more oxygen to this. We don't want anyone to discuss this. If we dare to actually criticize the book, on what grounds? And then we're going to get into a debate, and it's going to be put on the table, and it's going to attract attention. So basically now the sector is just saying, we've got to hush this up, totally. So I don't know really how to explain the complete silence of the book, of the people implicated in the book. I actually anticipated in the book, these are the traditional methods that they use, the smear campaigns. This is the way that they normally attack the critics. These are the examples of individual critics who have been, blacklisted and had these campaigns against them. And it hasn't happened. So actually, if you want to criticize the book, that's a good point to criticize. I was completely wrong on that one. I don't know why it is. I mean, the only thing that I can assume is that their lawyers have sort of said, you know what, just there's no point defending this. You're just going to have to let this blow over. But so what can we do? How can we solve the problem? I think the first thing is transparency. Yeah, this is the most opaque, murky sector that I believe exists, possibly on the planet, certainly within financial services. When you do an investment, when you get given that photograph of the person that you supposedly invested in, when you look at your microfinance investment fund and they give you the glossy brochure, I mean, it's total pure spin. There's absolutely no flow of information from the field to you. It doesn't even exist. Most of these banks don't even know who they're lending to. They don't even capture data on their own clients. So it's absolutely ridiculous that in America they say, oh yes, we've helped 2,463,914 female entrepreneurs. They don't even know if they're female, they don't know if they're entrepreneurs. The evidence is that most of them aren't doing anything entrepreneurial whatsoever. It's just total, complete spin. There's absolutely zero regulation, like I say, and until that changes, there's going to be no improvement. The self-regulatory bodies are, what would you call it, endorsement without enforcement. If you want to get endorsed in the microfinance sector as being an ethical person who adheres to the 6 client protection principles of microfinance, protection of the client, fair interest rates, the only thing you need to do to get the endorsement, the equivalent of a fair trade coffee stamp on the back of your coffee pot, yeah? You need to have an email address and a name. As long as you can do those 2 things, you can then shove on your website, we've endorsed the SMART campaign. And then everyone goes, oh, that's so nice. So you must be treating your clients well. Wonderful, I'll give you another €1,000. So self-regulation is a complete joke, and actual regulation doesn't exist. So that's just a couple of little problems. Now, obviously, the people who are resisting any form of regulation, no surprise who they are. Mainly the microfinance investment funds. Those intermediaries that we are hoping are acting in your best interest and the best interest of the poor are the first people to say, no, regulation is evil. We have to have free markets. Any kind of regulation is going to interfere with the poor people, and they're not going to get as much money. There was a wonderful case in SKS recently. I don't know if any of you are aware of SKS, one of the large Vikramakula. very large Indian microfinance institution, which did an IPO a couple of years ago, 14 times oversubscribed, the biggest IPO in microfinance history, made many people many millions of dollars. The share price, when the Indian government started regulating them, the share price fell 95%. And a few days ago, there was a lovely little news piece. It said, SKS share price increases by 50% as government relaxes regulation. Yeah? There is an inverse relationship. More regulation, bad for investors. It means you're not going to be able to exploit the poor people so much. You're actually going to have to do some sort of ethical treatment of them. You're not going to be able to charge them such high interest rates, and that's not very good for investors. Yeah? I mean, the correlation is quite uncanny. There is already some increased scrutiny coming from regulators, which is really encouraging. I mean, I've already had regulators calling me up and saying, what can we do? How do we do this? Where do we need to be focusing our attention? So, I mean, maybe there are some good signs that the regulators are stepping up to the plate, but until that happens, I remain fairly pessimistic. But I think one of the things which is actually really good, and given that this is Google, I think it's worth mentioning this, is what is the role of technology? Yeah? And actually, technology is already having a big impact in improving microfinance and could potentially have a much bigger impact. So the last thing is I'm just going to touch on some of the areas where technology is having a good impact. Yeah. First of all, cloud-based IT systems. The software that these banks use to operate their operations, yeah, is actually surprisingly complicated. You've got millions, high volume of transactions. You've got interest and capital repayments, and it is actually surprisingly complicated, yeah, just because of the sheer volume. And these people are repaying their loans weekly, sometimes even daily. So you can imagine the actual information flow is vast. So IT problems in the field are really difficult because you can't always get good staff. You've got problems of computer viruses. You don't have very high level of education in many of the places, so it's difficult to really manage it. Now you've got the first cloud-based systems are being operated. And in fact, one of them, I believe it's called Mambu in Germany, is hosted by you guys. So this actually gives a way for not only for improved IT, which means improved control, which means less fraud, which means more tracking of the actual activities, but it gives the investors in the US and Europe, it gives the regulators, it gives the rating agencies a way to actually look into what's really going on in the institution much more closely. Yeah? Obviously, they need permission, but a bank can sort of say to its investors, give us a few $1 million, but what we'll do is we'll allow you access to our IT systems so you can log in remotely and you can actually watch what's happening. And this is happening now. I've been in the offices of this company in Germany, and you actually see transactions coming in real time. You see credit application process being posted, and you can actually see who's regulating it. Oh, that looks a bit dodgy. I want to stop that one right now. This additional scrutiny is a really good thing. One of the things which we're doing now is we're using, I'm originally an econometrician, we're using some of the econometrics and statistical analysis that is traditionally used by credit card companies to analyze their portfolios and work out characteristics of well-performing clients, poorly performing clients. This kind of technology, which is well developed, we're now using this in microfinance. So combining that with cloud-based IT systems is potentially very, very powerful. So we're able to, for example, analyze databases and see, okay, these are the types of clients who are actually really benefiting from microfinance. These people are actually suffering from microfinance. Yeah, we can come up with very, very precise suggestions on how the bank can skew its entire operations so that it's doing more of the good microfinance and less of the bad microfinance. And we can do this without visiting the bank. Yeah? And if as more institutions go into cloud-based systems, we get a bigger and bigger data set, and we can potentially do some very interesting analysis. So that's one good example. Obviously, mobile technology is the big buzzword at the moment. Poor people do now have cell phones, and increasingly they're actually using smartphones as the prices come down. And as it's cool to have a smartphone, even if you can't afford to put food on the table, everyone wants a smartphone. So a lot of people, surprising number of people have them. So this is originally was being used for money transfers, M-Pesa, the virtual money, in East Africa, those sorts of things. But actually now there's a bank called Musoni, which is the first completely virtual microfinance institution based in Kenya. And I think they do operations in a couple of other countries. So they're actually a branchless bank that does all its loan disbursements, loan repayments, completely and utterly by cell phones. Now, the good thing about these smartphones is that it's not just that the poor can do transactions on them and that they can do them in a much cheaper way. The banks don't have to have big branch networks and lots of staff running around collecting loans. But it also is a way that we can get information to the poor people. So, for example, we're all used to here, whenever you want to buy something, you go on to Google and you compare the prices and you can see where you can get the best deal for whatever it is. Yeah? Poor people need to be able to shop around for the interest rates. Yeah? Where is actually the best place to get a loan? Yeah? It sounds like a really simple thing, but that information is not available to them. Ironically, if you're sitting in the US and you know where to go, I can find out all the information of the best microfinance institutions in Uganda for this particular person, for this particular purpose of loan. I can work that out from here. The problem is that the poor people don't have access to that information. As they start using phones, they're going to have more access to this. So that could potentially have quite a big impact. The use of mobile phones and the use of improved technology, it reduces the fraud, because fraud in microfinance is chronic. Yeah? And the ability to actually track the flow of money right actually from the source, right the way through to the audited statements, yeah? It makes fraud a lot more difficult. It doesn't make it impossible, and accounting fraud is still a big problem. But no, it's definitely cleaning up the act and holding people more accountable. One of the things which we're doing, I work with an institution down in South America. We're using GPS now. So we use Google Maps, and we can actually see in real time where our loan officers are. We can track them. We can optimize their routes to go and visit their clients so that they're not wasting time. That is thank you very much for Google Earth, by the way. That was a really good invention. And we can also track, if we see loan officers, spending too much time in certain regions, we can literally say, hang on, this guy's in a bar. That's not a client. There might be a little alarm bell ringing here. Sometimes the loan officers get a bit annoyed when we point this out to them. They say that we're following them, and we're like, yep. And look, you can follow yourself if you want. It's completely open. Anyone can log in. Another thing is credit bureaus. Yeah, credit bureaus. This is actually historically there weren't really credit bureaus in developing countries. Now, because they can get hold of the technology relatively easily, the software for managing this vast quantity of data. Now institutions can log in and see the credit history of even very, very poor people who are traditionally not even mentioned in any part of the formal sector. And then the final thing is what we're doing now is we're trying to launch a kind of WikiLeaks style support for whistleblowers in the microfinance sector. And this is potentially a very interesting thing because people within the microfinance community, we all know that this is going on, yeah? But it's very difficult. If you try to complain in a microfinance institution to your boss, don't you think it's a bit dodgy, treating the women, this aggressively, you just get fired, yeah? The interest rates seem a bit high, and we're telling our investors that we're charging 36% interest rate, but it's actually 136. There's some ethical questions there maybe. I'm not sure if this is completely transparent. You just get fired, yeah? So what we're hoping now is that now that there is enough critical mass of people who are willing to stand up and criticize microfinance, that we can start capturing this data directly from the people within the microfinance investment funds and the people within the microfinance institutions on the ground, where they have a way to actually send us information. And obviously, we have to check everything, but as we start seeing patterns emerging in certain institutions, this can be like the fuel that will tell us, okay, this is where we need to direct our attention. This is where we know journalists in these different countries. We can direct the journalists to the right people, and we can do this anonymously. So this is one element where we're hoping to use technology to actually improve the sector. But okay, by way of conclusion, okay, microfinance, it's not working very well, but it can work. I really believe that we can fix this. Yeah, I know a lot of really good institutions. Microfinance investment funds, I'm hard-pressed to think of one that is actually any good, but maybe there's one or two. The lending platforms, there are one or two good ones, yeah? But it does work. The model is proven to be working, yeah? If you've got the right incentive, if your goal is to help poor people and make a modest amount of profit, then you can do that. And there are hundreds of examples of it happening. Unfortunately, there aren't 10,000 examples of them happening, and it is the minority of cases where it's working. But I think we can fix it, and I remain very optimistic. But we need to start focusing on poverty and not on return on equity. Yeah? Return on equity will always lead to high interest rates and bad treatment of the clients. They go hand in hand. There's no other way. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. If you want to make more money out of lending to someone, you need to charge them a higher interest rate. Yeah? And I guess my final concluding statement is, if you're going to invest in microfinance, yeah, be very, very, very careful and ask really penetrating questions to the people that you're trusting with your money, because otherwise you will be duped. Thank you. And questions?
Hugh will be glad to take your questions. Please step up to the mic so the people at the remote offices and on YouTube can hear you.
Since I'm closest to the microphone. So a couple of weeks ago, we had the founder of Kiva.org here, right, who gives a good talk. Yeah. And early in your discussion, you said that there were quite a few academic studies that said microfinance doesn't work or hasn't worked. Mm-hmm. Did they indicate that it doesn't work because the system is just corrupt and unregulated, but in theory it could, as you sort of mentioned in your concluding statement?
If you look at the academic research, it's divided. Yeah. So there are a lot of papers that say, microfinance is a great thing. It's the miracle cure for poverty. Yeah, and we've got all this evidence to support that it's the case. There are a lot of other papers that say it's terrible. It's hurting the poor. Yeah. So it's not to say that there's no agreement at all. Yeah. There's a huge spectrum. It's when the two people in particular, David Rubin and Madame Duvendak, who are the people who really, really rigorously analysed the entirety of the sector, their overall conclusion was that it doesn't work, which is a lot of people are actually doing really good microfinance, a lot of people are doing really bad microfinance, and on average it doesn't work. That is the conclusion. Now, I'm not an academic. I haven't read Madame Duvendak read 2,836 papers. Mine, I couldn't imagine anything worse than going through even 20 of those papers. But the problem isn't necessarily because of microeconomic problems that are happening on the ground, yeah? But also because of the investment funds, the people who are channeling the money have a twisted incentive. They don't actually have an incentive necessarily to seek out the microfinance that does work because of this thing, the principal agent problem. Yeah. So, a number of people are now saying, okay, we need to start focusing on the flow of money, because just by looking down here, there's just so much complexity. There's just so many. There's 10,000 microfinance institutions. Each one is slightly different. Each one's doing something. It's very difficult to really ask why. But common sense alone is enough. If you go into a market and you say, okay, I'm going to lend to all the people on this side of the room. Yeah, you're all going to get loans. Yeah. So you get your loans and you work hard, and you're going to have to work very hard, because until you've made the first 100% return on your investment is just to pay me interest, yeah? But let's say that you work even harder, yeah? Well, what about these guys? They're just getting crowded out. They're just getting displaced because you're now selling so many tomatoes that these guys can't operate. Now, when you go to the academics and you say, okay, let me have a look at what are your papers doing? They tended to, until recently when they started doing random controlled trials, they tended to only look at this side of the room, which is in a way completely flawed, yeah? Where is the increase in aggregate demand? If the total number of tomatoes doesn't increase, it doesn't really matter who's benefiting, because it's a zero-sum game at the end of the day. Now, obviously, you can increase the demand if you lend to the consumers, yeah, the consumer finance. But then you're creating a completely artificial market. You're lending money to the suppliers, and you're lending money to the demanders, yeah? And you create a big bubble. And this is what we saw in Nicaragua, for example. The funds just flooded in. They pumped in, I think it was $420 million, yeah? And what was happening was the loans were just being recycled, one after the other after the other. The suppliers were often also the demanders, everyone was operating on both sides of the market. And this huge credit bubble just was created and just inflated more and more and more and more without any regulatory oversight, as usual, yeah? And eventually what happened? You had 30 people just said, two banks tried to imprison 30 people in the north of Nicaragua, in Jalapa, I think it was. And they put them in prison, and they said, you didn't repay your loans, so you're going to prison. and their families rebelled, then everyone in the community rebelled, then everyone in the region rebelled, and then it spread right the way across Nicaragua, and it became a movement called No Pago, I'm not going to pay, and you had just a grassroots movement of the so-called beneficiaries of microfinance just turning around and saying, you guys came in here 10 years ago, you told us you were going to get us out of poverty. The fact of the matter is, none of us have got out of poverty. We were meant to be protected by the government with laws about the maximum interest rates being 20, 25%. You're charging us 60, 70, 80% interest. No one's actually benefiting from this, yeah? And we're not going to pay you anymore. And the entire thing collapsed. And the microfinance community was like, this is a bit embarrassing, because it was caused by our own people. The people that we've been slapping up on websites all these years with sewing machines, saying that these people are just so eternally grateful to us for us being so generous as to give them a loan at 60% interest a year. They've now bitten us. So it was a real. That's what happens when you lend to both sides of the market. It's a false market.
Can you say something about micro savings as opposed to microcredit?
Yeah, micro savings is it's like the forgotten side of the entire equation. And I mean, I'm a big supporter of micro savings, because the great thing is if you can, the poor, it's not that they don't have access to credit. It's also that they just have no safe way where they can deposit their money and maybe earn a small interest rate just to cover inflation. That's all that's necessary. Yeah. So there are institutions which focus exclusively in micro savings, which is good, and there are also institutions which are microfinance banks, so they do the lending and they also have savings. It's more difficult with savings for two reasons. One is that you need to be regulated. Yeah? Even in these developing countries, there are much stricter rules about taking money from the general public than giving money to the general public, which is good. It should be like that. Yeah? So a lot of institutions are kind of hesitant to get into savings because it's really difficult. You have to be regulated. People are going to start asking awkward questions, and you're going to have to submit data to a central bank, which is going to mean that you can't do certain activities. In a way, it's much easier to operate as an unregulated NGO just doing credit. The other problem with savings is that they're not profitable for investors. Yeah? No one can actually make any money out of an institution that is just taking money from the poor and safekeeping it. Yeah? So there's a kind of incentive to not get into it. Now, there are people doing it, and I applaud it. I think it's the way ahead.
Yeah, I guess from the perspective of if you wanted to help the poor, then it sounds like micro savings is better. And if you're willing, to do matching funds or something like that, it seems like that. If you're okay with losing money, essentially, if you were going to donate the money anyways, then micro savings seems like a better option.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned you have all this data on the website, Microfinance Transparency.
Yeah.
How was the process starting to collect this data? I assume that at some point you have to start recording phone calls and so on. So when did that get started? When did you start thinking about it?
Yeah, what happened was I sort of describe it in the book to an extent. I was in saw a couple of pretty nasty frauds. And then when I tried to actually do something about it, I realized, damn, I don't actually have the data, the proof. And now that I've sort of raised the alarm bell, now it's too late for me to go in and try and get the data. So what I did, when I was working at this investment fund in Europe, when I started realizing, hang on, there's some nasty stuff going on here, I'd learned from the previous mistakes, and I basically just kept quiet, and just started secretly gathering all the data over, it's about a year, I guess, And then when I confronted the management of this institution, I was fired, went to court, won a court case against them. And then I was working as a consultant, but to an extent that was still kept relatively hushed up. It wasn't, people didn't put two and two together. So I was still able to work with a number of these institutions, bizarrely, because the communication in the sector is pretty poor at the best of times. So I was able to sort of lure them into conversations, and we were able to do things like, for example, we would make an investment in one of these funds in the EU, so we were protected by a European regulator. Do an investment simply to then be protected by the regulator. The moment we did the investment, bang, issue a formal complaint to the regulator, and then go to the AGM. This is another good trick. Do an investment, doesn't matter, even if you just got $1 invested in the company by law has to invite you to the AGM. You have the right to go to the AGM. So then you can go to the AGM and you can stand up and you can ask a really embarrassing question. So it was all planned. It was all, it was like just a long strategy of like, okay, let's go for this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. And there was a group of people. I mean, I didn't work on my own. I had a lot of support.
How long did it take? How long did this process take?
Well, I mean, it wasn't like, okay, now I finished gathering the data, now we start blowing the whistle. But I mean, really, it started in about 2007, and I guess the book doesn't really go beyond 2011. So it was about 4 years. But I was individually blowing the whistle in certain ways, during that period. But only now now I can't get any phone calls. Now I can't get any more data. Yeah, now it's over.
I wanted to ask, how are the mechanisms enforced for actually, how do they enforce repayment of loans? And another question is, how do you actually estimate risk in this? I mean, typically when you make an investment, you're balancing risk versus reward. And I think the 2008 fiasco showed us that nobody was able to estimate risk. And in this particular case, it seems even more difficult to estimate risk. So what kind of work is being done on that?
Yeah. Okay, the enforcement of loans, there's 1,000 different ways that people do it. The famous one is the group lending, so group liability. So if one person defaults, the other people in the group have to step up to the plate. You also have forced savings, which is pretty unethical, but a lot of institutions do it, where in order to get a loan, you're forced to make a deposit. So effectively, you're collateralizing your own loan. Yeah. They'll also just, in the contracts, they'll just have clauses which say, we can come and take away your pots and pans and your whatever. In the case of India, what you had in terms of getting loans repaid was such aggressive and threatening practices that actually, in the 54 suicide cases, actually it was 53 suicides and 1 murder. You just had women who they were in total despair. The loan officers would hound them, humiliate them, sit outside their houses and embarrass them in front of their neighbors, and just keep driving them down until eventually, once they've given up all their assets and they've got nothing left, eventually they just killed themselves. Yeah. With regards to risk, there's all sorts of different levels that you have to look at. I mean, are you talking about the risk for an investor also has additional risks rather than, in addition to just non-repayment of loans? You have things like foreign exchange risk. If you have capital controls, maybe you invest in a country, say for example you'd invested in Argentina. Now what you're seeing is it's getting very difficult to get money in and out of Argentina, so you've got sort of the additional risks from an investor's perspective. But on the ground level, I mean, one thing that is true is when people talk about the credit risk of the poor, it's actually really good. I mean, the statistics of the 98% repayment rates are true. They are true. I mean, it tends to be quite extreme. It's either 97, 98, 99% repayment rates, very, very good repayment rates, or it's a meltdown. There's not a lot really in between. So when you get to Nicaragua, suddenly you get like, 30% repayment rate. Yeah? But in general, the poor repay. In fact, when you look at who's the better credit risk, I haven't seen any data, but I think it would be rather interesting to see, what is the repayment rate of Mali compared to the United States right now? I wouldn't be surprised to see that there are a number of developing countries that are actually more, less risky than the US and Europe. I mean, yeah.
We talked about this a little bit before. A lot of people here are interested in Kiva, including some very wealthy people that I know. Could you say a few words about that?
Yeah, Kiva gets 10 pages in the book. It was I particularly focus on Kiva. It's difficult. I can't go into all the detail here because it's very subtle things that are happening at Kiva. With regards, did the money actually go to that particular person? Yeah. There are a lot of question marks about that. Yeah. There was the issue in the New York Times about Kiva post-financing transactions. So when you lend on Kiva, your money isn't actually going to that person. That person has already had a loan 6 months ago. Essentially what you're doing is you're buying the loan off the bank. Yeah, you're post-financing it. Now obviously you take the full credit risk. Yeah, and for all you know, the person is already in default, which raises an ethical question there. Maybe I would like to know at least if the person is already defaulting on the loan. Yeah, but then the other question is what are the interest rates that are not Kiva. Kiva doesn't charge interest. Kiva gives the money to the microfinance institutions. They then take this interest-free capital, yeah, that they don't take any of the credit risk, yeah, and they go and lend it out to institutions at rates which some people would consider extortionate. Because the microfinance sector doesn't dare define extortionate, you can never say that it is extortionate because there's no definition. The highest one at the moment is BRAC in Sudan, which is 88%. In Mexico, they tend to be in the 80s. And if you say to Kiva, I just want to just answer me one question. You've given me the photo of the woman. I know she's getting a goat. You told me about her children, her little story, her hopes and aspirations, and how much money she wants and how long and what she's going to do with it. And you give me all this information that can come from the other side of Mongolia all the way to my little computer in California. But there's no interest rate. Could you tell me what the interest rate is? They can't tell you. They can't or they won't tell you. I believe it's that actually they can't. Yeah. So they'll fob you off with a thing called the portfolio yield, which is the interest rate that the institution, on average, charges last year or the year before, and they get that data from a place called the mixed market, which is self-submitted data. So the bank gives the data, a couple of years later it gets into the Kiva website, and Kiva say that's like a kind of rough proxy of the actual interest rate. Yeah, that's as close as they get to it. Now the problem is that portfolio yield is like one of the easiest statistics to manipulate, legally manipulate under the accounting laws of most countries because of the subtleties of how it's actually calculated. And I have personally manipulated portfolio yields, I'm ashamed to say. Yeah, it's a really easy one to go for. It's also the one statistic that all the microfinance institutions are very sensitive about. They want to get that down as low as possible because they know that people raise an eyebrow when you see portfolio yields of 125%. It's such an emotive topic that they just do everything they can to reduce it. And it's very easy to reduce it. So, I mean, if you just ask one question to Kiva, for me, that's the question to ask, is why won't you tell me the interest rate of the loan that I made to that person? But the fundamental question about Kiva for me is, in the book I go through all their 990 reports and you can see the buffer account in Kiva, which is, I think currently it's about $40 million sitting in an account in California, in Wells Fargo, California. And who earns the interest on that money? Remember when you clicked I accept on the user acceptance thing and you forgot to read paragraph 89 of page 412 subsection E9? All the interest earned in the buffer account accumulates to Kiva. Of course, yeah? Now, is $42 million a large buffer account to have for a company that's actually doing about $60, $70 million a year? I don't know. I think that sounds like quite a big buffer to me, but I don't pass any judgment. I just say, I could do it on a smaller buffer. Yeah. But the question is this: who is Kiva for? Who are the beneficiaries of Kiva? This is my question to them. Is Kiva trying to help the poor, or is Kiva trying to give a nice feeling to people in America to feel like I've done something? It's like the child sponsorship. It's like, here I am in California. There's all this suffering in the world. I believe in free markets and entrepreneurship and everything. But what am I going to do? I can't do anything. So, I can just do $25 on my PayPal account, and I can get this nice fluffy feeling inside that I helped this woman buy a goat or a sewing machine. I've got a photo to prove it. And then I just feel better about myself. So my question is who is the beneficiary of Kiva? I don't think it's the poor at all. I think it's you guys.
It was big news in the last year that Facebook had an IPO and raised a tremendous amount of capital, presumably to fund future development of their business. I've recently heard from two Googlers about that principle being applied at a smaller scale, where very small startups can raise on the order of $100,000 or $250,000, which sort of resembles the difference in microfinance that we would typically refer to. But there's also the scale of, say, someone who wants to open a pizza shop in the U.S. and they want to raise $20,000 in order to get started on that. So I'm wondering, what is the difference between raising capital at the very large level versus this microfinance level? How should we think about the differences in these to accomplish a social good of prosperity for a group of individuals?
Well, okay, first of all, I would say that this label microfinance is actually ridiculous in a way. Microfinance is just banking. It's nothing more sophisticated than banking. We're just doing it in bigger volumes to poorer people at higher interest rates. So I don't think that you can sort of say, here's the formal banking sector of developed countries, and now we've got this new thing. It's not new at all. The difference, what you're referring to, is this, debt and equity. Those are two very fundamentally different things. Now, when you start raising equity, it has a whole different risk-reward profile. Yeah. So I think that saying that microfinance could be used for equity, maybe here that could happen, but the idea of having shareholder agreements and all this sort of stuff in the developing world is, in practice, probably not going to happen for 100 years. Yeah. But I don't know. Sorry. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if I'm.
I think I need to interrupt.
Basically, it's banking.
Yeah, it's banking. This is just banking, good old-fashioned banking. We've been doing it for 1,000 years. Now we're just doing it to the poor. There shouldn't be this sort of aura about microfinance. And actually, when you get the mainstream banks doing a thing called downscaling and moving into the microfinance area, in a way, that might be one of the most sensible ways to do it. Instead of setting up dedicated microfinance institutions, actually just saying, let's just get the banks to go deeper into the market. And that is happening already.
Let's thank you for coming here.
Thank you very much.